the state of Florida versus Collin Griffith. This is a criminal case. Collin Griffith, the defendant, has been accused of the crimes of first-degree murder and kidnapping.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It was a Sunday evening, September 8th of last year, in Auburndale, Florida. And it was at that time that the defendant viciously and savagely unleashed his full fury and hatred towards his mother upon her, when he stabbed her with such force that the knife went shooting through her neck muscles, through her esophagus, through her trachea, through her thyroid cartilage, and shot out the other side of her neck. You will hear and see that as this happened, she began to bleed, and bleed profusely through the huge gash in her neck. While she bled, the defendant was there and watched as the blood came out of the huge hole in her neck. You're going to hear that he was there as he watched the blood and the life drain from her body until she took her final breath and was officially dead. You're also going to hear that this was exactly what the defendant meant to do, and that this is exactly what the defendant had thought about doing and had wanted to do for quite some time. So much so that he told multiple people, including multiple Charlotte County Sheriff's Office deputies and his own grandfather, the father of the defendant's mother, Kathy Griffith. His name's Robert Willantis. You're going to hear from him. He'll fly in from New Mexico, and he'll tell you about those haunting statements that the defendant made. And you're going to see that exactly what the defendant said he wanted to do and said that he would do, he accomplished on the night of September 8th of last year. But how did Kathy Griffith get there, bleeding out on her mother's kitchen floor? In order to understand that, we're going to have to take a step back and take a walk through some time. So you're going to see, of course, not just what happened on and around September 7th and September 8th, some of the critical time leading up to the murder, but you're also going to see and hear how this all began. Now, we're going to take a trip back to February 14th of 2023, the year prior to the defendant killing his mom. At that time, the defendant lived in Oklahoma. And you're going to hear on February 14th of 2023, the defendant killed somebody else when he shot that person 2 times. He shot that person in the chest, and he shot that person in the head. You're going to hear that it was undisputed that he shot that person, that he was arrested for that killing, and that he has not been charged to this date. Now, after that killing, ladies and gentlemen, the defendant, as a little bit of time progressed, he moved back to Florida. He had been living with his dad for a number of years in Oklahoma, approximately 3 years or so. While he was living in Oklahoma with his dad, his mom lived in Florida, in some different places, but including Port Charlotte most recently. And you're going to hear that while the defendant lived with his dad, the mom, as any mom would, greatly missed her son. And she didn't get an opportunity for different reasons, including a very controlling dad that the defendant was living with. So Kathy Griffith basically didn't have much contact with her son, not because she didn't want to, but she would try to call him and talk to him, and it pained her greatly that her son was not with her. You're going to hear that there's another brother, an older brother. He really doesn't have much to do with this case, but nonetheless, there was an older brother who lived with his mom, Kathy, for a period of time before he moved out of the house when he was old enough. So, as the defendant moves to Florida, his mom wanted to make up for lost time. That was 3 years, 3 critical years of her life and his life when they didn't do mother-son things. They didn't spend time together. They didn't have all those opportunities that maybe other kids and other parents had. So Kathy, the defendant's mom, tried to make up for lost time. And she took her son on multiple vacations. They took cruises. They went to Disney World. They traveled out of the country. They went to Washington, D.C. And she spent all her time and affection and money on the defendant. That was her son. And that's who she had missed for all those years. Now, was Kathy Griffith the perfect parent? No. Was she the perfect person? No. But nobody is. But you're going to hear that she gave everything that she had, including her life, to try to take care of the defendant and spend as much time as she could with him, even at the cost of her life, which ultimately is what happened. Now, as the defendant and his mom lived in Charlotte County, in Port Charlotte, they lived in a house, a well-kept house. It was the two of them. And they did plenty of things together. Like I said, they went on vacations. They went to the movies. They hung out. It was just the two of them. So they had nothing but basically one-on-one time. And you're going to hear that Kathy Griffith, like any mom, expected certain things. These weren't off-the-wall, dictator-like things. These were simple things that she thought would be appropriate to teach her son about responsibility and respect. Chores, minimal chores, such as weed whack in the backyard, taking trash and food or candy out of his room, helping her around the house with whatever little odd jobs might happen. But you're going to see in here, the defendant wanted nothing of that. He didn't want to be inconvenienced. He didn't respect his mom. He didn't care about his mom. And wherever this deep-seated anger and hatred came from, it was real within him. And he told people about it. So as the days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, his anger, as you'll see, was building and building.
Judge, I'm going to object to this being argumentative.
As the time went on, you'll see that the mom had to deal with a lot of issues, including being attacked by her own son. You'll hear a little bit about the defendant being arrested at a certain point for domestic violence battery. He was a juvenile, as he still is a juvenile. And you'll hear that he was put on some probation. But in essence, he was not happy with his mom, so he took her down to the ground and stomped on her hand. But they continued to live together. The mom, you'll hear, was afraid of the defendant and what ultimately might happen to her. And she was afraid he would kill her. But she loved him. And you're going to hear that she wanted to be with him. And she was cognizant of the fact that when he turned 18, he was probably going to leave the house. And that would, for all intents and purposes, end that one-on-one time. And he would continue on with his life however he saw fit. So it wasn't like every day was chaos or bedlam in the house. But the defendant had issues. The mom had some issues. But they were working through them. Now, sometimes they would go to the movies together. Sometimes there would be good days. And you're going to actually get to see kind of like an inside peek of some time on September 7th and September 8th, the day that the defendant killed his mom. You're going to see that in the form of Ring camera footage that Kathy had set up inside because she was so afraid of what her son might do to her. And you're going to see that there was cameras set up in different parts that basically captured the same or similar things. But you're going to get to see some footage from a kitchen camera that captures the kitchen as well as into the living room. So you're not going to have to sit through 48 hours or 72 hours of just nothing happening. but you're going to see some clips so you can kind of tell what the vibe was on those last 2 days of Kathy's life. You're also going to get to be able to see the timeline as it continues. We talked a little bit about jury selection, about a timeline, because nothing happens in a vacuum. So as the defendant's living with his mom, he starts making these statements that he wants to kill his mom, and that if he has to go back to his mom, he's going to kill her or do her harm or do himself harm. And he tries to make accusations against his mom that you'll see she was never arrested for anything as it pertains to the defendant. But nonetheless, he starts telling detectives, he starts telling deputies. And so the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office has different units, as does a lot of law enforcement agencies. And you'll hear that they took a proactive approach because they didn't want to see anything bad happen to the defendant, and they didn't want to see anything bad happen to the mom. So you'll hear that there were multiple deputies and detectives that would check in on the family, would check in on mom, would check in on the defendant. And their goal was to try to ensure that both parties got along and that, of course, they lived long, happy lives together. It didn't work out that way, not from a lack of their trying. So as the year continues, the defendant, as I mentioned, got arrested for the domestic violence battery. He got Baker acted a time or two. And when he would be about to be released, he would make statements. Basically, he would say he didn't want to go with his mom. If he went with his mom, he was afraid of what might happen, of his anger, that he would kill his mom. He also made statements that he was afraid that she would do something to him. But the reoccurring theme that you will hear from the witnesses from the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office is that the defendant verbalized what he ultimately did, which is that he would kill his mom. You'll hear from one or more deputies that even asked him, well, how are you going to do that? And he specifically mentioned, sometimes he would mention different things, like shoot or stab, but a reoccurring theme was he would mention that he would stab his mom. So the intervention continued with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. They would talk to both Kathy on the phone, the defendant on the phone. They were accessible. They would call and check in. They would stop by the house and talk. And the defendant and his mom independently, they had the ability to call the deputies and the detectives as well. Now, 2024, around February 19th or so, around that time, or perhaps a little bit earlier, the defendant sent a text message. He had many communications with an attorney that was
I'm going to object based on we don't know this.
Ladies and gentlemen, continuing on to some of the statements that the defendant made that explicitly forecasted what he did on September 8th of 2024. I mentioned the name Robert Willantis. Robert Willantis, as you'll hear, was Kathy Griffith's father. He is the maternal grandfather of the defendant. You're going to hear that Robert Willantis, of course, had a relationship with his grandson, loved his grandson, cared about his grandson, and still does. And the defendant told him something that was super, super disturbing, to say the least. You will hear from Robert Willantis that the defendant said to him that he wanted to kill his mom and how he was going to do it. And the defendant said, more than anything else, I want to slit her throat and feel her bleed out and feel the life leave her body. That's how much I hate her. You're going to hear that Mr. Willantis, needless to say, was absolutely shocked. And he told his grandson, that's sick, that's twisted, you can't do that. You know, you and your mom have issues and you're going to need to work through those issues. September 7th of last year, The morning started with Kathy buying her son, or letting him use her credit card, to buy Starbucks. Bought a couple drinks, a breakfast sandwich, and the defendant came home. And this is going to be some of the ring footage that you see. So you'll be able to see some of these interactions. And you're going to see the mom and the son, and some about how they're talking to each other and kind of what happened that day. The mom had minimal requests of the defendant. On that specific day, she wanted her son to help her put up a bookshelf. The defendant didn't want to be bothered. The mom wanted her son to weed whack the backyard. The defendant didn't want to be bothered. The mom wanted her son to clean up the food and the candy that was in his room, attracting ants, but the son didn't want to be bothered. You'll see that he had his Starbucks, he had his sandwich, he wanted to do what he wanted to do, which was he wanted to take a walk, get out of the house and exercise. So the end of the day, or sometime during the day, the end result is that the mom got fed up with him. Kathy was sick and tired of being disrespected, sick and tired of doing everything for her son, and basically told him, get out until you can show me some respect. Well, the defendant had no problem with that, because he just wanted to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it, so he went to his grandma's house. So that's how the defendant and his mom in Port Charlotte, Charlotte County, how their lives come to Polk County. Because the defendant's grandmother, who is Kathy's mom, her name is Susan Detman. Her and Robert Wolantis used to be married back in the day. She had multiple houses, one in the Keys, one in Auburndale, and perhaps one somewhere else too. So the defendant got in his car. It was a nice Volkswagen, black four-door. You'll hear and see that the mom had a white four-door Volkswagen. And the defendant drove to his grandma's house in Auburndale. And you'll see and hear at his grandma's house, he didn't have to put up with his mom asking him to do things, or to be respectful, or to do chores. You'll also hear that during the relationship between Kathy and her son, she got him video games, she got him a phone, she let him use her credit card to fill up, and use his bank card to fill up gas. She provided food. Of course, she provided shelter, clothes. I mean, the basic necessities, but she did more than that. The defendant, you're going to hear and see, is a very smart individual. He was in high school and was, I believe, taking college courses and had an interest in the law. And you're going to see that he was a fairly smart individual, and he would use that knowledge to try to do certain things. So on September 7th, the defendant leaves. The mom is at home, and the mom's angry. She's not happy. Does she want to hurt Collin or kill him or do anything to him? No. She's mad because she knows that her time with her son is slipping away. He's 17 years old by now. Incidentally, he was almost 16 when he killed the individual in Oklahoma. Now he's 17 years old on September 7th and September 8th. So mom is not happy because he's disrespecting her. He's not doing the chores. She's busting her rear end doing everything for this kid who's ungrateful. And she's mad. But nonetheless, she wants him home. She doesn't want him with her mom. She doesn't want him out running the streets or not knowing where he is. So she continually texts him and calls him. Her only desire is to get him home. Not to be mad at him or hurt him or ground him. She's willing basically to bend over backwards, as you'll see from the evidence, to just be with him. That's what she wants, is just time with him. You're going to get to see through text messages between her and him, her state of mind. and what was going on. And the defendant was basically just blowing her off. He didn't want to be aggravated. But you're going to see kind of the mom was frantic, and once again frantic in terms of being a mom and wanting to know where her son was and wanting her son back in her house. So she started to give him ultimatums, things that she wasn't going to follow through on, some of the things. She was hoping not to have to follow through on any of these things. But you're going to see that she was saying, if you don't come home, I'm going to sell your car. If you don't come home, I'm going to cancel your insurance. I'm going to turn off your phone. And she would turn off the phone that she provided for him multiple times. She would turn off his phone. She would take away his computer. All things that she bought. She bought him a computer for his school. She bought him a phone because, of course, that's what parents do. And you'll see when you're a child, you can't get a cell phone with AT&T or have an account with AT&T if you're not 18 or older. So he was relying upon his mom, and happy to do so, because she made sure that he had everything that he wanted. So she was saying these things because basically she was hoping that he would be afraid of them and would come home. But he could care less, as you'll see. But then the Oklahoma killing resurfaces. And you're going to see that besides just pure anger and hatred towards his mom, that his motive, an additional motive for killing her, was what she texted him. Because he was concerned that that Oklahoma killing was going to come back around. Of course, it was still under investigation and still is, but that was going to be reopened. And you're going to see firsthand why the defendant didn't want that to happen. And why that just infuriated him even more towards a mom that he hated and couldn't stand for no good reason. You're going to see firsthand that Kathy texted her son between 12 and 12:29, and he received it. And she texted him, Collin, the recordings of you admitting to killing, and then she stated who it was, and planning the murder. There are 4 different instances from my Ring camera, are all going to Bob, Susie, Amanda, and Chris at 3 p.m. today. And mind you, this is the day that he murders her, shortly thereafter. She continues on, plus the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud. Chuck is the defendant's father, Kathy's ex-husband. So Kathy continues on, plus the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud, where you told your dad you hated me and I was an evil bitch, are being sent too. My dad is sending me his recordings of you telling him how you planned my murder back in February. Audio, video, emails, texts, and phone records are all being sent. For the record, no, you cannot have a single one. Your attorney can request them. She continues on. All because you didn't want to help me mount a bookshelf. That took under 30 minutes. Weed eat the backyard and clean your room because bugs were in the candy you had all over. Remember, you chose this. You have 10 minutes to call me and fix this, Collin. When the defendant read that text, his anger level just rose even more. Later that same afternoon, Kathy pressed it even more. And she sent a text to her mom, Susan Detman. And mind you, the location where the defendant had run to was Susan's house, his grandma's house. She was down in the Keys at one of her houses, so Collin had free range of the place. Hey, no rules, nothing to do. He could do whatever he wants to do. Nobody's even there to supervise him. And that's why he would like to go places where there were no supervision. I mean, specifically his grandma's. So Susan was in contact with the defendant because she was driving up from the Keys, and the defendant was staying at the house there. So Kathy texted Susan a similar text message. And she texted her mom, Collin's grandmother, tell Collin the recordings of him admitting to killing, and then she stated who the person was, and planning the murder. There are 4 different instances from my Ring camera, are all going to Bob, Susie, Amanda, and Chris at 3 p.m. today. plus the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud where Collin told his dad he hated me and I was an evil bitch are being sent too. Dad is sending me his recordings of Collin telling him how he planned my murder back in February. Audio, video, emails, texts, and phone records are all being sent. For the record, no, you cannot have a single one. Your attorney can request them, so can Collin's. You're going to see that afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, in an eerie video, Kathy changes her clothes. I mean, you're not going to see her change her clothes, but you're going to see she appears in the exact clothes that her son would kill her in, just mere hours later. And you're going to see that she had on some blue jean shorts, she had on a black t-shirt with a coffee motif, and she had a nice leather purse / backpack over her shoulder, and she left the house, and she was not happy. She was not happy at her mom, she was not happy at Collin, but she had one thing that she wanted to accomplish, which was not to do her son any harm, but to get him home so they could continue being mother and son. So she made the drive from Port Charlotte to Polk County. And you're going to hear that at a certain point she arrived. Sometime in the ballpark of 5 o'clock, shortly before the defendant would murder her. Now there were two ladies across the street in separate houses, but you have the grandmother's house on one side of the street, and then basically the two neighbors that lived across the street from the grandma, two nice ladies you'll hear from. But they both kind of independently saw and heard things. And you're going to hear that at around 5 o'clock, and one of the witnesses, I believe it was Miss Sally Bell, she remembers the time frame because she was about to leave for church. And she and her husband, you'll hear that they always like to leave right around 5 o'clock or touch before 5 in order to get to church and to talk to people and get a seat. So around 5 o'clock, these two ladies, Sally Bell and Nancy Jones, independently, they're just at their houses. They see Kathy and they see the defendant, and they're having an obvious argument. They also see that Kathy is not doing anything violent to the defendant, but she's animated, and the defendant is animated. And then they saw the defendant grab his mom by the hair and start dragging her from the driveway carport into the house. And as that happens, Kathy is telling her son, "Collin, stop, let go, let go. Let go of me, you're hurting me." And that's the last that those two neighbors saw of Kathy Griffith. That's the last anyone would see of Kathy Griffith alive. You're going to have an opportunity to see crime scene footage and crime scene video, and you're going to see that the violence continued and started on that day when the defendant grabbed his mom by the hair and dragged her into the house as she was saying, let me go, Collin, you're hurting me." You're going to hear and see that this mom was doing nothing violent or physical to her son, who she took care of and loved. But the defendant thought it was all right to grab his mom by the hair and yank her into the house. Well, what happened on the way to the house? Kathy, one of her AirPods falls out. It falls in the mulch. The defendant drags her into the house, infuriated. Another earpod falls out of her other ear. You're going to see photos that Kathy would wear AirPods a lot to talk on the phone, listen to music. You're going to hear as he dragged her and was furious, you're going to see her AirPod case falls in the living room as he continues to drag her to the back of the house, letting his anger and rage come out. You're going to see the crime scene. of that brutal, vicious, savage killing that I mentioned at the beginning of the opening statement. You're going to see pictures of Kathy who came out of her flip-flops as the defendant was attacking her. You're going to see photographs of a charger that is strewn about on the floor from when the defendant was attacking her. You're going to see that same brown leather backpack/purse that was over her shoulder when the defendant was attacking her came crashing to the ground. And you're going to see that it's got blood all over the place. That when he stabbed her, she was still holding it. There's blood on the outside. There's blood on the inside. There's blood on the front, on the back, on the wallet. And you will see firsthand the carnage that Kathy suffered as she laid in the pool of blood that came out of that deep gash in her neck, compliments of her son, Collin Griffith. When all the evidence is in, ladies and gentlemen, you should come to one conclusion. That being that the just verdict is holding the defendant responsible to what he chose to do on September 8th of 2024. And that just verdict, based upon the evidence that you will see and hear, is that you find the defendant guilty of both first-degree murder and kidnapping for the crimes that he perpetrated on his own mother. Thank you.
You're probably expecting me to say something very different from what Mr. Levine presented, and you'd be right. I'm going to start by introducing some of the people that are a part of this family and whom you will hear from. You've heard some of their names already, but I think it's helpful if you know the relationships among them. So first we have Collin Griffith. Obviously you are aware of him. He's 17 years old. Catherine, or Kathy as she's known, Kathy Griffith, is Collin's mom. And tragically and sadly, she is no longer with us. Susan Detman is the third main person who is involved in this saga. Susan Detman is Kathy's mom and Collin's grandmother. Christopher Griffith is Collin's older brother, so son of Kathy and of Charles Griffith, who goes by Chuck sometimes. He was born when Kathy was very, very young. Susan was a regular part of Kathy's life because she lived in Florida and close in Florida. Susan periodically stayed in Charlotte County. You heard about some of her other homes. She travels quite a bit, some for work, but for a variety of reasons. But she is the constant in Kathy's life. Always there when Kathy needs something, especially money. Some of the things you heard about that Kathy provided for Collin, according to Mr. Levine, were actually provided by Susan. Susan paid for every single trip they took, and that Kathy chose to take. Susan would pay Kathy's phone bill sometimes. At any rate, Susan was the constant. She will tell you about Kathy's personality. She'll tell you about her mental health problems. She'll tell you about Kathy's drinking and misuse of pills. She will tell you about Kathy's threats to commit suicide over the years, but not just threats. She will also tell you about the several attempts Kathy made on her own life. Beyond that, you're going to hear that Kathy not only wanted to cause harm to her own self, but Kathy has threatened or done harm to other people. You'll hear some of those details about some of the things that she actually did to another person in front of Collin, involving weapons. You will hear that she has threatened to kill different people at different times and actually taken steps towards completing that wish. You also hear that Kathy is not exactly reliable in what she says. You'll hear this from her own mother. That she makes things up. That she is unpredictable. She is erratic and goes into rages. As I said before, Kathy has been, or was still estranged from multiple family members at the time of her death. I won't go into the details now, but you will hear about some of those details as well. Collin graduated early from high school with college credit. He was not failing. You may hear that Kathy was upset with Collin because he had an appointment set up with, he was dual enrolled too, so he had, high school teachers, but also college professors. She got upset that he said, "Oh, I have an appointment with one of my teachers or professors," and she was mad that she hadn't been told that in advance. There was a disagreement. So, either on the way home or when they get home, you'll hear that Collin told this to police later, by the way, that my mom handed me an envelope and said, "Here are all the important papers you'll need if I'm gone." Then they are inside the house, and Kathy got her gun. The gun that she has owned and lied about whether she had it in her house or not at a variety of times, and pointed it at her son and said that she was going to either shoot him or herself or both. And then she handed the gun to Collin and said, "Just shoot me." She's ordering him around the house. At one point sends him outside and says, "When you hear the pop, you can come back in." Makes him sit down outside her bedroom, cross-legged. When he didn't want to sit cross-legged, she said, "You're going to sit cross-legged," with the gun pointed at him, while she sits on the bed. At some point, Kathy, I guess, decided not to go through with whatever her plan was, and in her erratic and unpredictable way, she put the gun away and drove Collin to school. So Collin goes straight to his teacher and says, "My mom just pulled a gun on me. She threatened to kill me. She threatened to kill herself. I'm scared." So the teacher immediately goes to the school resource officer, and they get the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office involved. Collin repeats to multiple people, his teacher, the SRO, the sheriff's officer, deputy that comes. And they did send someone to Kathy's house because they were doing this investigation, and Kathy won't open the door. She didn't want to speak to the officers. Eventually, they convinced her to speak with them. She said she'd had bad experiences with law enforcement in the past. she finally says, "That never happened. Collin's just making it up because he's upset that he was failing a class and I took away his phone and his AirPods because he's failing a class." Okay, so divergent stories, right? Sheriff's deputies go back to Collin at the school and say, "Your mom says this never happened. She says you're just mad at her and made the whole thing up." And Collin is like, "No, it happened. This is what she did to me. She has a gun in the house." They didn't believe him. They believed Kathy. So they put Collin in a Baker Act facility for those statements. Interestingly, Kathy, rather than being relieved that her son, who allegedly threatened to kill her, is in a safe place, does everything she can to not cooperate with the people in the Baker Act facility, the sheriff's deputies, DCF. They insist, because of what happened in Oklahoma, and because of what he said his mom had done to him, and because he said, "I don't feel safe going home because I'm afraid of what she might do to me again and what I will do in response," that he was safest in this facility. Kathy won't sign medical release forms so they can get more information about the family. She won't approve any medication for Collin. And then she hires a lawyer to get him released from the facility against all advice. When they were getting ready to release him to Kathy, he says, "Do not send me home with my mom. I am scared. She threatened me. If she comes at me, I'm going to defend myself." So they put him back in the Baker Act facility. By the way, they find out she does have a gun. She eventually Kathy tells Detective Zanoniani that Collin is going to this place called Sandy Pines, and he's going to be there from between 60 and 90 days. They're going to work on a treatment plan for the trauma he has suffered, for the statements he's made. But after 3 days, Kathy checks him out of Sandy Pines against medical advice. On November 12th of 2023, Collin called the sheriff's office. He may have even called Corporal Rentis. Okay, so he is reaching out. He is being forthcoming. He says, "My mom and I had a verbal argument. I left the house because I'm scared. She told me that I should just pack my bags and go." But then you'll hear this happens over and over. It's a theme. She will kick him out, but then she'll claim he's a runaway and he must come back. Inconsistent. So he called Rentis and says, "I don't feel safe at home because my mom still has her gun and because she's threatened me before, and now we're fighting or arguing." That night, on November 12th, the deputies decide that it's best if Collin go with Susan, his grandmother. She also claims that Collin attacked her again to law enforcement. She said, "He was trying to run away and he battered me." So the sheriff's deputies look at her ring video and they're like, there was no battery. She tried to step in front of him and block him from leaving, escaping the situation, and may have brushed by her. That's what she was calling a battery and trying to get him arrested. But then she would have probably demanded that he come back home with her. Needless to say, much chaos. In March, in what I hope is a little bit of positive news in all of this, Collin gets his driver's license, and he gets a job at Domino's. And he did get a car. Kathy didn't buy him the car like she wants everybody to believe. It came from a trust that existed separate from Kathy. He's still going back and forth between Susan and Kathy, managing to accomplish things as a 17-year-old, 16, then 17-year-old. And then we get to the end of August, beginning of September of 2024. And you'll see a text from Kathy in the end of August saying to her mom and to other people, "I'm going into that dark place again. My therapist thinks I should go to a facility for at least a few days," but she doesn't. September 7th, you heard about the whole bookshelf thing. There was, in fact, an argument over whether Collin would help her put up a bookshelf. And he is not being entirely respectful to her when he says, "It'll take too long, I have to go to work." Also, there aren't studs on that wall. If we put it up there, it's going to fall and it's probably going to hurt someone. So did he help her put up the bookshelf? Absolutely not. Should he have? Maybe. But he didn't. And this is Kathy's reaction, and you will hear her words and see her. "Get out and don't come back. Even if you're bawling your eyes out. And give me the keys to the house." So Collin's gathering things. He goes out the door. You may or may not see her opening the door and then closing it and locking it with his keys to the locked house inside. So Collin, being kicked out again, calls Susan, who is a concurrent guardian. By the way, Collin had been put on probation for the domestic violence battery, and his probation officer's name is Monique. You'll hear about her. And the court had said that even though most of the time you're not allowed to go out of the county when you're on probation unless you're with a parent, it's okay for Collin to go visit his grandmother in another county. Just got to let Monique know. She went to where he was safe. And the neighbors that you heard about will tell you that she came in hot and angry, that she sped into this quiet 55 and older community, whipped her car into the driveway, whipped it back out, pulled in front of the house, got out, slammed the door, and marched up to the carport door. Collin was never in the yard where her earbud was. She went up to the house and went in the house, angry. Within a few minutes, Kathy comes back out of the house, unlocks Collin's car, and starts throwing all of his stuff into it. And then after she's done throwing his stuff into it, you'll hear the neighbors say that she was yelling and shaking her fist, and it looked like she was the one who was being aggressive, and that Collin was standing in the doorway. So there's a door that goes into the living room and out to the carport, and that he was standing in the doorway. And when she comes up and you'll hear varying terms. You'll hear that he put his hand on her shoulder by where her ponytail was and kind of brought her inside. I don't know that you'll hear a neighbor say that he dragged her from the yard by her ponytail, by her hair. They will say that they heard her yelling. You can evaluate whether you think Collin was doing anything at that point to harm her. That's going to be part of your decision. Or if You think he was trying to avoid her making a scene in the community where teenagers aren't supposed to be living. You'll hear from the neighbors that they had seen Collin there before. He was never a problem. He would visit Susan because, like I said, he went back and forth, but they had never seen Kathy there before, ever. So, Kathy and Collin go back into the house, and it's about an hour later that Collin calls 911, crying, upset, saying, "We got in a long fight. My mother's bleeding out. Please send someone right away." The 911 operator explains how to do CPR, tells him to move her, to lay her on her back, to be able to do CPR. You'll hear him doing CPR on her while counting with the 911 operator. And intermittently he'll say, "Just send someone, she's not bleeding anymore." And when first responders get there, she was already dead.